Understanding Family Education Rights and Privacy Act at Chestnut Ridge School District. What is the Federal Rights and Privacy Act? The Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, also known as FERPA, is a federal law that protects the confidentiality of student information. It protects personally identifiable information of the students, including the students' educational records, from being disclosed to unnecessary parties. Parents or eligible students can receive the information. FERPA requires that the school or district maintains direct control of the appropriate records and maintains them, and should not give educational records to unauthorized parties. The historical timeline of FERPA, it was first put into place in 1974, and then a lawsuit, Plyer versus Doe, changed it by adding a state cannot deny access to public education to a child if they are illegally in the country. That added those students to the FERPA guidelines. Then in 1986, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act also prohibited the intentional interception of any oral communication. This went along with FERPA. In 2002, No Child Left Behind gave the parents right to opt out of disclosure of student information. School districts are required to develop policies and procedures to protect the personal information of students. And then in 2012, FERPA was amended, and it authorizes representatives to access students' private information for longitudinal studies. The parents cannot opt out of this. FERPA compliance at Chestnut Ridge School District. Firstly, FERPA does apply to you. FERPA applies to every public and private school system. For us and all schools to receive federal funding from the U.S. Department of Ed. Some ways that we comply include encrypting files and emails. So specific files that you do receive, they have a specific key that you have to access. It's an extra layer of protection for the school employee's property. Yearly professional development. Yearly, we do retrain on FERPA and what it includes, the rights and requirements of our school district, as well as consequences for not abiding by FERPA. And lastly, educational records rights. So being sure that we are aware of what data exists in educational records and the rights of people and ourselves to view and share that information. What is an educational record? An educational record is anything directly related to that student. So it is maintained by our school district. According to FERPA, the information is directly related, so it's personally identifiable information. Some examples of that include the student's grades or progress reports, health records, disciplinary records, grade point average, and attendance records. Some things that educational records are not. They are records or teacher notes that are kept in the teacher's possession, records of a law enforcement unit. So if they were in trouble with the school's police, that is not an educational record. So any records by medical or psychological studies of a student that is at least 18, employment records, and directory information. If parents do request to access their educational records and they believe that something is inaccurate, they do have the right to ask for it to be amended. And if the school district does not abide by that, the parent can file a complaint and they have a right to a hearing to get that changed. Who's considered a school official? So under FERPA, school officials do have the right to look at educational records. Some members that are considered school officials include teachers or principals, counselors or support specialists, board members, account attorneys, and human resources departments. FERPA permits that the school and districts do disclose these educational records if they have a legitimate educational interest only to the records. Common examples of directory information. So this is information that is not in the educational file. It can be given out as long as there's public notice by the school. So that includes students' names, their address, phone number, birth date, dates of attendance at the school, any degree or awards that they've received, their email address, their place of birth, a student photo, as well as their grade level. Surveillance cameras in schools. This is kind of a new, ever-changing portion of FERPA. Based on the Fourth Amendment, video surveillance recordings are allowable with the exception that they are in a public place. Okay, so that's hallways, school buses, parking lots. It has to be in plain view for it to be allowable. Districts do need to notify the community that they are using surveillance cameras on their property. So again, it cannot be in a private space for those to be allowable and to use in the court of law or against a student. Electronic Communications Privacy Act. Basically, this prohibits the intentional interception of oral communication unless one party is consenting to that. Districts should notify individuals in the conversation of the recording. And the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, it preserves the confidentiality of student records. That's FERPA. It provides parents and eligible students to their educational records, as we spoke about before. So if something from a surveillance camera were in their educational records for whatever reason, the parents or student could access that. Law enforcement and other third parties are prohibited from the use of surveillance camera footage unless it is already held by the law enforcement agency. So some common violations of FERPA: be very cautious of free apps and websites that are taking unnecessary information. So these websites need to make sure that you're agreeing that the data that they are given, it belongs to the school, not the vendor, and that it's the vendor's responsibility to process it for the benefit of the school and the students, not for themselves. Watching with social media and emails. Making sure you're only releasing records to the accurate people, so those school officials as well as parents and children who are under the age of 18, they are in post-secondary school or they're still being claimed as dependent. So if that student is over 18 and their parents are not claiming them as a dependent, then the parent no longer has rights to their school records. And again, we talked about school officials. Who is a school official, and they must have a legitimate reason for accessing the files, as well as other state agencies. To destruct data, so that is getting rid of information once it is no longer needed. So there's usually guidelines in place. It differs. But that is destroying the information. Third parties also have to destroy information once it is no longer needed and the relationship has been terminated. So to do so, you clear, purge, and destroy. So starting out, you're sanitizing the data, then you're moving on to a more elongated process, and it's a longer technique to render that data. Honestly, you destroy it, and its ability to use that data is no longer there. Ultimately, through FERPA, make sure that if you are unsure of accessing or giving out privileges to specific data, that you ask an administrator, and they are here to help you. Ultimately, FERPA is here to protect teachers, other staff members, administrators, as well as the students at our school district. And there's my works cited. Thank you.